In 1982, a film was released, and it was hated. A pseudo-remake of the 1951 sci-fi classic The Thing from Another World, the film was a critical and financial failure. Vincent Canby of the New York Times described it as instant junk, whilst a reviewer in Rolling Stone magazine coyly referred to it as Alien on Ice. Critics complained about the film's weak characterization, lack of tension, and horrifically brutal special effects. Audiences, meanwhile, gave a similar reaction, with the public of the early 80s rejecting the film's nihilistic tone in favour of an ironically similar light-hearted affair released at around the same time. And these people missed out on one of the most spectacular, genre-redefining, autorial pieces of horror cinema of all time. But that's to be expected, because if there's one thing The Thing does, it's hide. And it hides in plain sight. John Carpenter's The Thing was released in the summer of 1982 alongside many other exemplar films such as E.T., Poltergeist, Rocky III, Blade Runner, Tron, The Dark Crystal, and Fitzcarraldo. Don't worry, I'll get to that one another time. The film was loosely inspired by the 1951 version as well as the original story upon which both were based. Whilst the idea of a remake had been tossed around for a while, things only began moving when Carpenter began working on the film. Carpenter had been producing films for years with a wide body of work spanning many genres. However, his filmography often seemed to fall back on the sci-fi and horror genres, himself stating that these themes often found him. Carpenter had caught the attention of the mainstream cinematic public with the success of his innovative 1978 slasher, Halloween, closely followed by a string of other successful sci-fi and horror films. It was this success, alongside the recent overwhelming popularity of Alien, that gave producers hope in the possible success of a sci-fi horror hybrid spearheaded by Carpenter. Carpenter had been a fan of both the original work by John W. Campbell, alongside Howard Hawks' 1951 film, placing numerous references to it in his other works. However, he was sure to use these inspirations as merely a baseline for the movie, moulding the majority of the film to his standalone directorial vision, one which matched his previous films. One of the most recurring and academically discussed aspects of Halloween is the film's theme of what I'm calling infiltration. The film's killer, Michael Myers, infiltrates a safe suburban setting, slashing and killing his way through unsuspecting victims. One of the reasons audiences reacted with such palpable fear was the personal connection they had to such a setting. Largely living in suburbs themselves, audiences soon became petrified of the idea that something unknown could be lurking next door. At first glance, it seems this idea couldn't be less relevant to the isolated and alien Antarctic environment in which The Thing is set. However, it's not the infiltration of suburbia and the fear of our next-door neighbour that The Thing is centred on, but rather the infiltration and fear of ourselves. After a brief title sequence, the film opens on a nearly monochromatic colour scheme of blacks and whites as the shaky camera pans over the frozen wasteland. Immediately, within the film's first proper shot, we have its setting, an isolated, snow-locked research facility in the middle of the Arctic. During the course of the film, the characters leave this location only once, to go to another, near-identical facility. Even before the threat has emerged, and before we as an audience even register it, we understand that the characters are trapped in a hostile and unforgiving setting with nowhere else to turn. This isolation is perhaps the very core of the movie, present in both the opening scene and at the film's conclusion. As critic Billson writes, the location's simplicity lends the film a primal, elemental feel which never quite dissipates, even during the elaborate, stomach-turning horrors that are to come. Undercutting this sequence is Ennio Morricone's opening score, a dull bass line akin to a heartbeat, slowly rising and falling in intensity. Already, semiotics linking to body parts, exhaustion and fear begin to emerge from the limited arrangement, composed to reflect the synth-heavy sounds Carpenter typically creates for his own soundtracks. In this way, the music translates many of the film's major thematic links, as well as invokes Carpenter's previous works, acting as a promise of things to come. And it is during this sequence that we are introduced to the movie's first key character, the dog. When it is first shown, the dog is seen fleeing a pair of Norwegians in a helicopter attempting to shoot it. It is introduced to us as a literal underdog, to which the audience and the characters take an immediate liking to. Dogs in films had been a staple for years since the very beginning, be they friendly or not. But this dog is different. It's unemotive, unresponsive. We as an audience have developed expectations as to how these animals are supposed to act, and so we know something is not right. As if to prove our suspicions, the other dogs are shown to feel the same discomfort in a sequence Billson describes as the first narrative hook of the film. And soon, about 20 minutes later, we see why. We'll discuss the special effects of this sequence later, but what's important here is how this gradual sequence, drip-fed over the film's first quarter, establishes all of the key elements of horror which will act as through lines throughout the rest. The dog teaches both the audience and the characters of the film an important lesson that will continue to manifest throughout. Trust no one. The film's main character is named R.J. MacReady. The script describes him as 35, helicopter pilot, likes chess, hates the cold, the pay is good. This description is apt, as throughout the entirety of the film, this information is about all we learn about MacReady as a character. We never really get a solid read on him. He has no backstory, no relations, hell, we don't even get his first name. In an interview during the film's production, his actor Kurt Russell described him as an outsider fighting against another outsider, and I think this is the perfect description. He's an outsider to the audience just as much as he is to the other characters, and as such, we can understand how to others he's suspicious, because to us he's suspicious. And these same aspects of suspicion and uncertainty are true of all of the characters of the film. Carpenter chose to whittle the original film's cast of 37 down to 12, giving each vague characterization. Palmer, the pilot, Clark, the animal handler, Copper, the medic, Blair, the biologist, Knowles, the cook, Windows, the radio operator, Fuchs, the scientist, Bennings, the meteorologist, and Childs, the mechanic. Brief side note. Screenwriter Bill Lancaster later admitted a slight regret in not having any female characters in the film, but noted that had they had one, she likely would have just been reduced to the stereotypical role of domestic romance common to women in sci-fi horrors. This isn't entirely relevant, I just felt it was worth noting. Look, if I could put a footnote in a video, I would. Each of the characters are markedly distinct in appearance and personality, yet all are given as little fleshing as Mac. We only follow him because he's the one that the film is centered around, but it could just as easily have been about Childs or Fuchs or even Blair. And this blend of characterization serves one key purpose: parkas. Much of the film takes place in the snowy outdoors, with the bodies and faces of the characters obscured by their large parkas. Now tell me, who is this? When the characters speak, it becomes obvious that this is Windows. However, when silent, when obscured, or even when the camera angles change, the characters blend. It becomes impossible to discern who they are, or what they are. There's a reason the theatrical release poster is a man in a parka, face obscured. Hell, due to issues with the practical effects, a large chunk of the movie is filmed with unknown doubles, with special effects artist Rob Bottin stating, "I see their faces and I say to myself, how did I get away with that?" But no one catches it. These characters aren't themselves. They're amalgams. They're nobodies. They're everybody. And they almost seem aware of this. And it's here, with all of this in mind, half an hour in, that the horror begins.
How long were you alone with that dog?
I don't know, an hour and a half maybe. What the hell are you looking at me like that for?
I don't know.
What?
I don't know, it's probably nothing.
Shortly after discovering the dog at their camp, Mac and Copper go to explore the Norwegian research facility from which the two shooters emerged, and from its dilapidated, worn-down exterior, we see something is clearly wrong. Billson labels this the Chinatown syndrome after the Roman Polanski film, in which the events taking place are shown to be cyclical. Though we have no knowledge of the threat at this point, we can already see the havoc it's caused, and the havoc it will likely cause again. As Billson writes, a threat is always more effective if it is not the threat itself that is first revealed, but the possible end result. We've seen its damage, but we have yet to see the creature itself. Like Myers, Carpenter keeps the thing hidden from us. Through a mix of black and white mise-en-scène, highly shadowed lighting and off-screen action, it lays dormant. That is, until it strikes. Carpenter writes, "It's one of those things where if you decide to do a monster movie, you'd approach it in one of two ways. Either you do the classic Howard Hawks way, which is to keep the creature in the dark. You never see it, it's all shadows. Which sounds like we don't need to do anything else to this. That's enough to scare people. But I thought, well, why don't we bring it out in the light and really show the creature here? Make you believe it. And if you can pull that off, then what you've done is really something different." Bottin shared a similar mantra when designing the creature due to the incredible success of Alien. He states, "When it turns out to be a guy in a suit, it just isn't going to cut it now because people want to see more. Because of these decisions, scenes featuring the monster are brightly lit, details aren't hidden, close-ups are shown. Every aspect of the monstrous being is highlighted, almost daring the audience to look closer." Body horror through practical effects had existed in cinema from some of its earliest days. This can particularly be seen within the horror genre, with classics like Mystery of the Wax Museum, The Phantom of the Opera, and perhaps most famously, Universal's Frankenstein, which created the large four-headed, bolt-necked monster we recognise today. Many of these earliest horrors focused on the morphing and bastardization of the human form, similar to imagery within The Thing. However, as critic Pete Boss notes, by the 1980s, audiences had grown desensitized to the gore, violence and horror depicted through these classic bodily forms. Through the evolution in horror over time, ironically thanks in no small part to Carpenter's own work, a shift had emerged within the genre away from simply shocking imagery towards rooting out the psychological motives behind them. Of course, some films didn't exactly get the memo, but now I'm wandering into personal opinions. Even at the time, amongst the absolute slating the film got from critics, a key compliment which frequently stood out was addressed to its practical effects, which, whilst gory and tasteless, certainly left an impression. It's with this in mind that Addison argues the film to be something of a reaction to the wider body horror of the era, pushing the bounds of the horrific imagery present in the past, while also exploring the psychological depths that are equally as key. This is why scenes featuring the Thing's gruesome transformations flip between shots of the creature's grisly contortions and close-ups of reactions from the characters. It reminds the audience that this, whatever this is wrong. It's not to be accepted, it's confusing and it's frightening and it's inhuman. Though the practical effects sequences are impressive in spiking up tension and horror, they are ultimately the release of the pent-up fear within the audience. They could be compared to jump scares in how they act as short, cathartic releases of tension. Side note, jump scares have gotten a pretty bad rap, particularly within the murky waters of YouTube quote-unquote film criticism, but again, that's a topic for a different video. I just want to make it clear that when I compare these scenes to jump scares, I in no way wish to belittle or reduce their importance, rather give credit where I think it's due. The true horror comes before, when the question of where is the thing, or more aptly, who is the thing, are omnipresent. It's that sense of ambiguity as to who or what is safe that makes the film what it is. There is no concrete answer. When discussing the creature, Billson compares it to the replicants of Blade Runner, asking, at what point does the impersonation of humanity become humanity? And, as Dorothy Parker once said, how can you tell? Boss also summarises this idea very well, writing, "The categories of otherness which traditionally functioned in the horror genre are no longer adequate, with the horrific practical effects reflecting the idea that the Frankenstein's monster of the present is difficult to distinguish from its creator. To me, the ultimate horror of the Thing as a creature is its deformation of the very basis of what we, as a society, deem as human." However, I could be wrong. Addison's article goes into some depth regarding the socio-political metaphors that can be drawn from the misshapen carcasses left by the Thing. The ongoing AIDS epidemic leaving innocent citizens, American citizens nonetheless, as physical husks of their former selves. The uncomfortable concept of sexuality, particularly those of a homosexual nature, clashing against the heteronormative masculinity of its protagonists. And, by that same logic, the binary Arctic clash as a battle of the sexes between the hegemonic militant group and a fleshy Freudian embodiment of Barbara Creed's monstrous feminine. Frankly, it would be foolish of me to argue that the interpretation of the monster as representing a corruption of humanity is objective, particularly with my personal perspective as a straight Caucasian cisgender male. If one was to look at it from Creed's point of view, the film could easily be reinterpreted as a rather conservative story about a group of macho, non-sexual men repressing corruption from a monstrous creature designed to eradicate their way of life by assimilating and changing them. These ideas blatantly exist in the original film's strong anti-communist, pro-military allegories, so finding them repeated here wouldn't be a stretch. Similarly, the thing itself could even be viewed as a victim, merely trying to survive against the oppressive hegemonic world it's been thrust in, blamed and attacked at every turn despite the obvious hostility and discord pre-existing before its entrance. I'm not trying to say that any one interpretation is more correct than the others, or that any were even remotely considered by Carpenter. Hell, I'd go as far as to say they almost definitely weren't. However, I feel I'd be doing the film a disservice if I didn't mention the major surge of post-racial, post-sexual, and post-gender reanalysis of horror works that is ongoing at the current time. The topic is a long, complicated, and interesting one that I'd love to explore more at a later date. All of that being said, it's the ultimate sense of ambiguity that, to me, crystallizes the film into one of the best horrors of all time. Though the final sequence is a little too die-hard for my liking, it's the final shot that makes the film haunting. Mac and Childs, the final two survivors, sitting down drinking together. They share a laugh and a smile, and they sit there, and they watch each other, and they wait, and we wait, and then there is no catharsis, there is no end. Addison describes the film's ending as the final nail in the coffin for its success, ultimately assuring its box office failure. However, she cites this as a necessary sacrifice that assured the unending legacy of the film. The thing doesn't end, because the thing doesn't end. Alright, conclusion time. Ooh. In this video, I've tried to scratch the surface of what I believe to be one of the most critically underanalyzed films in modern cinema. And despite working for weeks on it, I've barely even gotten that far. So much terror, so much excitement, and so much expertly crafted filmmaking all bundled into an experience that acts as possibly the finest example of its type, evolving beyond the limits set down by its forefathers into depths unknown. The Thing is a film about humans facing off against unwinnable odds in an inhospitable environment, about paranoia, about authority, about what it means to trust and live and even exist. It's a film about the horror of simply being and the greater horror of not. It's a film about me, and it's a film about you. It's a film about us. Watch The Thing. Please. Hey guys, thanks for watching this one. It took a little bit of time to make. I'd like to remind people that I'm no expert on this film or anything, I'm just a fan who's passionate, you know. If you want to research any more about it and maybe disagree with my points, I've left a couple of sources that I used in the description below. I want to particularly recommend Billson's book. I got a lot of my information from it, maybe a little bit too much, but hey, this ain't academic, this is just for funsies. I also want to thank Super Eyepatchwolf and HBomberGuy, whose videos greatly inspired the format of this one. If you like this, then you'll like their stuff, so go check them out. Also, like, subscribe, comment, all that other stuff. I hope to make another video kind of like this in the near future. Peace out. Remember, you'll get through whatever it is that you're going through right now, and keep watching the skies. Yeah.